Canada is sending an unmistakable warning to its southern neighbor. If Washington escalates the brewing trade conflict, Ottawa may respond with one of the few weapons sharp enough to make even the United States flinch: its vast reserves of energy. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. On Wednesday evening, Ontario Premier Doug Ford spoke with unusual bluntness, making clear that Canadians will not sit idly by while President-elect Donald Trump threatens to slap punishing tariffs on Canadian goods. Trump, preparing to enter the White House for a second term, has pledged to impose a blanket 25% tariff on all Canadian imports on his very first day in office. Economists on both sides of the border have already sounded alarms that such a move could ignite a trade war with consequences too vast to predict. Ford, leader of Canada's largest province, suggested that if Trump follows through, Canada must respond in kind by cutting off one of the United States' most reliable supplies of electricity. "We will go to the extent of cutting off their energy, going down to Michigan, going down to New York State and over to Wisconsin," Ford declared. "We need to use every tool in our toolbox if Trump goes down this path." Ford's threat was not made lightly. Ontario itself is not an oil powerhouse like Alberta, but it does play a pivotal role in the flow of electricity across the border. Ontario's grid, deeply interconnected with the American Midwest and Northeast, sends steady streams of hydro and nuclear-generated power into U.S. states that have come to rely on Canadian imports as a backstop against shortages and peak demand. By raising the possibility of severing those lines, Ford was drawing attention to just how interdependent the United States and Canada have become, not just in terms of trade in goods like cars, lumber, or dairy, but in the lifeblood of modern economies: energy. Ford acknowledged that retaliation would inflict pain on both countries. "Canadians get hurt, but I can assure you one thing: the Americans are going to feel the pain as well. And isn't that unfortunate?" he said. His comments reflect a wider mood of apprehension in Canada. Trump's proposed tariffs could plunge Canada into a recession, slashing exports, cutting jobs, and shaking investor confidence. The country's economy, highly dependent on cross-border trade, would be hit almost immediately. For Ford and others, this leaves little choice but to consider measures drastic enough to make Washington reconsider. The notion of Canada leveraging energy exports as a bargaining chip is not new. In the past, political leaders and analysts have occasionally floated the idea, though rarely with such bluntness. What makes Ford's comments striking is the timing, coming just as Trump's return to power reopens old uncertainties about the stability of North America's economic ties. To understand the weight of Ford's words, it helps to look at the numbers. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration (EIA), America imported nearly 39 million megawatt-hours of electricity last year. Of that total, 33.2 million megawatt-hours, by far the vast majority, came from Canada. Though those imports account for less than 1% of total U.S. electricity consumption, they play an outsized role in ensuring grid stability. Canada and the U.S. have long engaged in cross-border energy trade designed not just for profit but for resilience. When heat waves push American air conditioning demand to record highs, Canadian electricity helps keep the lights on in cities like Detroit and Buffalo. Conversely, when droughts shrink Canada's hydroelectric reservoirs, Canadian provinces often rely on American electricity to fill the gap. The trade is important to grid balancing, constantly matching electricity consumption to electricity production, and helping to shore up electricity supply, the EIA explained in a recent report. The arrangement has worked smoothly for decades. Power transmission lines linking the two countries stretch from New England to the Pacific Northwest, creating one of the most integrated energy systems in the world. The United States paid about $3.2 billion for Canadian electricity in 2023, though that was down 30% from the previous year, partly due to shifting demand and pricing. Cutting that flow, even temporarily, could create localized headaches. States along the border, from Vermont to Minnesota, have come to rely on Canadian power as a cushion. Sudden disruptions could force utilities to scramble for replacement supplies, driving up costs for consumers and raising the risk of blackouts during periods of high demand. R.J. Johnston, research director at Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy, emphasized that the U.S. could likely manage such a crisis. Even in an extended outage, the U.S. has the ability to add more generation capacity in a relatively short period of time, he said. In other words, the pain would be sharp but temporary. While Ontario's threat centers on electricity, the far greater vulnerability lies in crude oil. Canada is not just a supplier of oil to the US, it is the supplier. In 2023, the United States imported an average of 1.4 million barrels of Canadian crude per day, more than half of its total oil imports. This is not simply about numbers, it is about infrastructure. Many American refineries, particularly in the Midwest and Great Lakes regions, are designed to process Canada's heavy crude. Without it, they would face enormous challenges adapting to other feedstocks. Patrick DeHaan, an energy analyst at GasBuddy, warned that a sudden halt in Canadian crude exports would send shockwaves through the U.S. fuel supply system. "I'd be more worried about supply than price," he said, noting that without Canadian oil, some refineries would be forced to shut down or drastically reduce output. The result would be gasoline and diesel shortages, higher prices, and growing frustration among American consumers. Yet experts agree such a move is unlikely. Oil is the backbone of Canada's economy. Shutting off exports to the US would amount to economic self-sabotage, depriving Canadian producers of their largest and most reliable market. As Robert Yager of Mizuho Securities bluntly put it, "Do I think that would ever happen? No, because it would hurt everyone involved." Still, Canada has been gradually preparing for the possibility of diversifying its customer base. The completion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, which links Alberta's oil sands to the Pacific coast, gives Canada the ability to export significant volumes of crude to Asian markets. Japan, South Korea, and China are all potential buyers. While it will take time for these markets to develop, the pipeline offers Ottawa a potential escape hatch from over-reliance on the US. Ford's threat is not occurring in a vacuum. The US and Canada, despite being close allies and partners, have long sparred over trade. Disputes over softwood lumber, dairy quotas, and steel tariffs have flared repeatedly over the years. The renegotiation of NAFTA under Trump's first term, which led to the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, highlighted just how fragile even the most entrenched trade relationships can become. Softwood lumber has been a particularly bitter point of contention, with the US frequently accusing Canada of subsidizing its lumber industry. For decades, this dispute has simmered in the background, occasionally boiling over into tariffs and countermeasures. Energy, by contrast, has largely been spared from such fights, until now. Trump's 25% tariff threat is seen by many Canadians as a direct assault not just on trade but on national pride. For Ottawa, failing to respond forcefully could invite further aggression. For Washington, underestimating Canada's resolve could trigger consequences it does not anticipate. Analysts warn that the situation could spiral quickly. If Trump follows through, Ottawa would face mounting pressure from provincial leaders like Ford to hit back. Energy would be the most visible tool, but Canada could also retaliate in other areas where it has leverage, such as critical minerals like aluminum and nickel, materials that U.S. defense and manufacturing industries depend on. "This is a threat that shouldn't be ignored," said Patrick DeHaan. "Canada doesn't want to take this lying down. Ultimately, both sides have much to lose. A full-scale trade war would disrupt supply chains, hurt consumers with higher prices, and damage industries deeply embedded in cross-border commerce. Automobiles, agriculture, aerospace, and energy, all sectors that thrive on the seamless flow of goods and resources, would be thrown into chaos. Even beyond economics, the political fallout would be severe. The US and Canada have long prided themselves on a special relationship, rooted in trust, shared values, and mutual reliance. A breakdown over tariffs and retaliation could strain that bond in ways not seen for generations. As Ford's threat reverberates, one thing is clear: the stakes of Trump's tariff gamble extend far beyond dollars and cents. Energy, the invisible glue that binds North America's economies.